Hello everyone, welcome to Ed Talks Film. My name is Ed and we're here to talk film. Today we are going to be talking about The Fabelmans, the latest film by director Steven Spielberg. It is directed and co-written by Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner. And this is the story of a young Sam Fabelman who is growing up with Jewish parents and discovers a love of filmmaking. Now, as many people already know, this film is semi-autobiographical and is basically kind of about Steven Spielberg's own childhood and how he fell in love with filmmaking um, from an early age and into his teenage years. And it's interesting because, Steven Spielberg has had this great, big, long, storied career. And now he's finally telling his own story, which is interesting because to see like somebody decide like, oh yeah, my own story is worth telling, and why is that? I think some people necessarily, sometimes their story isn't that great, but Steven Spielberg's story is interesting because he's able to find drama in something that's maybe not even really that miraculous, maybe to a lot of other people, but as the story of Sam Fabelman, the story of Steven Spielberg, is kind of crazy for the times, and it's not like he grew up in a war-torn country or anything like that, but that doesn't minimize the kind of the drama and the impact of the story that he's able to tell about himself, which I think is probably the biggest achievement of this film, because it's not like Steven Spielberg has some like crazy like rags to riches story. It's not like Steven Spielberg has some insane like just insane story about like their childhood. Like a lot of directors, like a lot of really famous directors, their childhoods aren't like super duper crazy interesting, and Steven Spielberg is able to find a way to take his story, which actually does have a lot of very interesting complex family dynamics attached to it, and create a really really good dramatic and feel good story out of it in a way that I thought was very very well done, and probably his best film since the early 2000s. um, I've been very critical of Steven Spielberg on this channel here and there, but I think this is one of those times where I think like, oh yeah, Steven Spielberg actually hasn't lost it. He's back, which I really appreciate because he was a filmmaker that I grew up with as a child, and I was only mesmerized by his films. I was purely in love with his movies, and from a very young age, Saving Private Ryan, E.T., Jaws, um, Indiana Jones, those films kind of drove my life for a lot of it. A lot of my life was sincerely driven by the films of Steven Spielberg. A lot of my my imagination, how I saw the world, was driven by him as director. And it's so great to kind of see him tell the story of people like himself, about himself, but it's more than that, because that whole kind of idea, that archetype, you know the lonely kid who feels out of place and ends up getting into some sort of artistic medium and becomes obsessed with it. That is kind of a universal feeling to a lot of artists, including myself. I never really felt in place for a lot of my life, or like I fit in. I still really don't feel like that. And the thing that I turned to was movies. It took me it took me a while before I really like decided like, oh my god, like movies is what I want to do. But when I was younger, like I just made movies all the time. I had a neighbor, and I would have him come out, and we would like just shoot Nerf guns and like make stupid little movies. I went to like some summer camp, and I would make stupid little movies in our little movie program class that they had. Um, and that was like all I had. It was weird, but I didn't want to. But I didn't even think that was possible for me to like actually be able to do with my life. And it took me like until high school to even realize like, oh yeah, maybe this is just something I just want to do. Maybe I should just do that. You know what I mean? So watching this movie is actually super duper inspiring, which I really really liked. Man, it's just cool. It's just, I don't know. I'm pretty excited because it's just cool to actually like have the new Steven Spielberg movies to see, and actually for me to actually feel 100% good about it for once, because I feel like I haven't felt like that in a long time with his work. Going to the performances in this movie, the performances in this movie are incredible. Michelle Williams, once again, Brilliant performance. Do I think it's her best performance? I don't think so. I think Manchester by the Sea is probably the best thing that she ever did, if I'm being honest. Maybe even Blue Valentine. But she is doing a lot here. It wouldn't surprise me, obviously, to see another Oscar nomination for her. But I definitely, she might even win. That's what some people are saying. I'm not necessarily sure I'm there because Michelle Williams seems to always get kneecapped for some reason at the Oscars. It's very, I don't even know. I don't even understand how that's happened. So I feel like she should have won at least twice by now. But, it would be interesting to actually see where that goes. And she's able to play, Sammy's mother very, like, it's something Michelle Williams does where she can play, like, very vulnerable and at the same time, like, kind of be super strong and be able to, like, realistically, believably pull off the idea of somebody that, like, has a facade. You know what I mean? You see that in a lot of characters, like, oh, they present themselves one way, but then really they're this way or whatever. She's able to, like, really kind of present that kind of way about her. And kind of like how that over time, like, that line just gets blurred. And also, like, the idea of kind of, kind of emotional instability that kind of comes with just feeling like maybe your life isn't what you wanted it to be, and then kind of how that drives you crazy. She's really, really good at actually kind of playing that character like that, as somebody who's just super in touch with their emotions, who everybody really loves, but at the same time is deeply troubled and doesn't always make the smartest decisions about what to do about that feeling. Paul Dano, and again, brilliant, plays, the father Fabelman. He's really good at kind of playing like what a lot of people's dads I would think are. I mean, it's kind of a similar situation. With mine is that, like, this kind of strong, silent type of person who, is kind of like down to business, very, very logical, very almost computer like, but also has, like, this deep love for his family. He's just not necessarily the best at showing it. And it's actually very interesting to actually see Paul Dano in a role where he isn't playing like a complete utter psychopath for once, which I really like, because we actually don't really get to see, this particular side of Paul Dano all that often. He's usually like some sort of unhinged thing now. Since There Will Be Blood, Paul Dano's just been like on and off unhinged in movies. But he's there's some moment towards the end of the movie where he's talking to Sammy Fabelman, and it is just absolutely heart-wrenching, because it's one of the few times in the film where he really, like, opens up. He really opens up, like, to somebody else in the film in a way that you never see for most of it, and it's actually really heart-wrenching. And kudos on him for actually, like, being able to deliver something like that. The range of a character like that is, it's kind of hard to pull off and not, like, come off like flat and cardboardy all the time. But when it's time for him to deliver, he delivers big time. And then Gabriel LaBelle, who plays Sam Fabelman, great. He's so good. I was really worried because I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of child actors, and even actors around my age group. I kind of find, I just find myself kind of annoyed. I feel like there's never, like, this real true sense of genuineness, this actual sense of being lost into a role. But he pulls it off great. I really truly believe in this kid's passion for filmmaking in this film. I really believe in his drive, and in the trouble of his life as he's watching and learning these things about his parents as he grows up, and is able to, like, realize, oh, like, everything isn't the way I really thought it was growing up. Everything is much different than I actually ever could have imagined it would be. There's something deeply wrong with the environment I'm growing up in. And I think that's maybe a trait of a lot of people who are artists, because there's an observational quality to art in and of itself, especially with movie making. It's purely observational. And to kind of, like, show that on screen in a way that's super convincing is very good, and it's written very well. And Gabriel LaBelle is really able to, like, bring that home with his performance in a way that I absolutely loved, and I actually liked him on screen for basically the entire film, which is something I did not expect going into it. There's also an amazing scene with Judd Hirsch where he kind of floats into the movie and floats right out of the movie. It's weird. He's like this kind of like side. It's literally like almost 2 scenes in the whole movie with him in it. It's 2 scenes, back-to-back scenes with him in it. It's almost like, and it's not even like one scene stops and the next scene starts. It's like they just bleed right into each other. And he he gives maybe the best like single scene performance moment in the whole movie, just because he plays this kind of weird like old like distant uncle character that kind of comes in and has this big sort of scene with Gabriel Labelle's Sam Fabelman, and you're just kind of like, what is going on here? This guy's insane. And you kind of feel like that, but then he kind of gets onto something and he just rolls with it, and it's super charismatic. It's super funny. It's easily one of the best sequences in the whole film, and I absolutely adored it. And I adored Judd Hirsch's performance. He's so good in the movie. And getting to the script, Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner, they really nailed it. Honestly, I really think that this is one of the best Spielberg movies in at least the last 20 years, I would say. At least 20 years, maybe even 30 years. It might be up there. The writing of the story, like I said earlier, right? The story balances a couple things. It balances the idea of somebody having a really deep passion and kind of following that no matter what. But also, it's not like a one-track mind in that sense, because it also has to deal with how this person's world is affecting him and what that does to him as a person, in terms of how that affects his passion, but also just how it affects him as a character in the relationships with the people around him, both because of his passion and because of his observations about the environment that he's in. And a lot of that kind of comes into play with Seth Rogen's character, who also gives a beautiful, amazing performance, very nuanced performance that I loved. And he's kind of like the catalyst for a lot of like the drama in the movie, weirdly enough, because he is a very comical character that you also really, really adore and love. But he is the cause of some of the issues in there. And that's actually very interesting, interestingly explored by that screenplay, and I think in a very nuanced way, in a way that I think a lot of people can relate to, which is really cool. But also, like, the film is also able to write family drama in a very compelling way, in a way that feels very real too. I think that's a lot of movies kind of fall flat with family drama, because they kind of make the drama super big, and then they kind of wrap it up in a kind of storybook ending that they kind of trick you into thinking isn't a storybook ending, but it really is. This movie doesn't really do that. This is kind of unflinchingly truthful about like what about like the things that we don't talk about at parties and things like that, that kind of go on within the Fabelman family. And that in and of itself, I think, is a very hard thing to do, and the film kind of nails it. And specifically in ways that where I was observing that I was like, the script does very subtle things, very interesting things, that when you see them on screen, and you see how Spielberg is able to like direct some of those kind of discovery scenes, like those kind of what would you call that, like inciting incident moments that happen like throughout the screenplay, you're really by it. You're really by it. It doesn't even feel like you're watching a movie. It really does feel like you're there. And going beyond that, going beyond the whole family drama aspect, this is a really compelling story about somebody who has a passion, and getting to watch these really fun, amazing sequences where he's making the movies with his friends, and they're super excited and they're figuring out how to make what they want to make happen. I have some of those same moments of discovery when I was making little short stupid movies when I was a kid with people that I was around, and getting people in to try and like tell the story I was telling and recreate scenes from movies and all that jazz, and it put a really big smile on my face, just like super joyous. And Spielberg is taking the magic of filmmaking that he helped pioneer and then recapture it by telling a story about somebody learning about the magic and the wonder of filmmaking. And that's kind of hard to do. I feel like, you know, I movies about movies I feel like are hard because they kind of a lot of times come off as super pretentious and like, oh my god, they're making a movie about themselves. Like, oh my god, I'm so amazing. This movie really doesn't do that. It's kind of a really unpretentious look at Spielberg's own life, and I think part of the reason of him like not even naming the characters after his own family kind of leads into that. But it really is just about the universal feeling of discovering a passion, discovering an art form, discovering something that you just want to pour your soul and your life into and you don't ever want to stop. That's really interesting. And Spielberg is able to completely nail that, and he really does kind of make the best movie he's made in a while, and that's really incredible considering I really haven't felt that much cool about Steven Spielberg since Munich. I feel like Munich was like kind of the last movie where I really felt like I was seeing a director working at the top of their craft from Steven Spielberg, and now I believe he made it right back up there, and I'm excited to see what he does next, because this movie really wowed me. And it was super emotional, and yeah, and there's also a great cameo towards the end of the movie that is honestly super hilarious, and film nerds are gonna get it, and it's gonna be one of the best things that even like film nerds are gonna have an even extra level of enjoyment. It's already super enjoyable just as a layman, but film nerds are really gonna love kind of a scene towards the end of the film if you haven't already seen it. But yeah, The Fabelmans, Steven Spielberg. Love this movie. Super excited for you guys to see it if you haven't seen it already. I know this review is really late. I honest to God wanted to do this review a while ago, but kind of life caught up to me and I had a lot of other things I had to do. But here we are. So thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Adios.